salt, about 2 tablespoons of oil, and of course a blender.
Next, set your stovetop to medium heat. And find your favorite frying pan.
First things first, add 2 tablespoons of oil to your pan and let it heat until it starts to shimmer. Once it's heated, add your beef, spaced evenly. Season generously with salt and pepper, and let it cook. My, doesn't it look delicious?
Remember, keep an eye on your beef. Cook for 2 to 3 minutes and make sure that all sides are browned evenly. Once your beef has cooked through, add it to your blender.
And with a touch of water or broth if you have it.
And blend it. And then pour it into your favorite glass. My, doesn't that look delicious? And enjoy! Cheers!
Hot and frothy.
Hi, I'm Alexandra Kenefick, and I'm a doctoral researcher creator at Concordia University in Montreal, Canada. I'm so excited to be part of this conference and to talk to you about my research. I thought we'd make it fun, and I'd start by introducing you to some of my friends. Then we'll do some art together, and I'll discuss the film you just watched. I thought we'd start at the stables today because, as you may have guessed, animals play a central role in my research. In particular, our relationships with them as meat. But don't worry, these horses aren't for eating. The horses here at the Victoria Therapeutic Riding Association are important therapy workers and instructors for children and adults looking to explore their confidence and capabilities. The human relationship with other animals is at the heart of my work, which I believe starts and stops with horses just like these. But let's pull back a little so we can see the whole image, because it's a big one. Meat is a very, very broad and loaded subject. Food is as broad a subject as you can get, because everyone on the planet has a relationship to food. And strangely enough, unlike kimchi or grits or even rice, everyone has a relationship to meat, even these guys. That's because everyone has a relationship to other animals, whether by intimately coexisting with them as farmers or hunters, by seeing them on a plate in a restaurant as eaters or abstainers, playing with them as loved companions, observing them as research subjects, despising them as pests, worshipping them as gods, or knowing them as direct kin. Our relationships with animals are full of passionate emotion, moral struggle, ethical confusion, hunger, ambivalence, defiance, disgust, and tradition. It goes without saying that humans and other animals go way back. In fact, our relationships with other creatures have been pivotal in shaping our individual and collective identities, and have become deeply embedded in our sociological infrastructures. We can see this when we sit down to eat at the table, or travel to a new part of the world. What kind of animals are eaten there? What animals are not? How are they eaten? At what occasion? And why? Ask anyone about why they do or do not eat animals, and you're bound to learn a thing or two about who they are as a person, their individual tastes, cultural background, and moral philosophies. Most importantly, you'll observe a window opening onto a vast and complicated arena of human exceptionalism, animal rights, and deep divisions of power. Interrogating the ethics of meat consumption delves deep into ancient history. It stretches across all cultures and affects all ecosystems. How does one even approach such a big and complex tangle of actors, environments, and abstractions? And what are we looking for in this mess? Why is it important? It's just food. Just food? Yes, we've had a long and morally frustrating history with animals as food. But this history isn't just about us and other animals anymore. It's about us and the concept of others. Our era's old decision to conceptually and literally divide humans from other animals was the inauguration of animal oppression and the coinciding fight for their liberation. But it was also the inauguration of our categorical and hierarchical coexistence with all living beings, humans included. Following the seemingly simple division of separating humans from non-humans cascades limitless categories that work to push us all apart in order for the ruling class to maintain power. Other animals soon became divided into friends, foe, and food, while humans became divided into civilized and savage, men and women, hetero and homosexual, colored and white, and so on. In other words, on the backs of animal marginalization is the oppression of all those considered other. Those who, over a long history, have been reduced into categories and stereotypes and slotted into a spectrum of weak and powerful, seller and sellable, white and dark, memorable and expendable, good and bad, with animals at the bottom and elite humans second only to heavenly figures. It is why certain animals and their parts have become synonymous with who eats them. It is why prime cuts of big animals like beef and venison have long been synonymous with wealth, whiteness, and maleness. It is why women are expected to prefer skinless chicken breast, why French people are disrespectfully called frogs, and why Black communities have shouldered the stereotype of being most comfortable eating cheap and greasy fried chicken with their hands. It is why women have long been compared to pieces of meat, and why some women will be prime rib while others will be hamburger. And when we realize that these oppressions intersect, and that women may also be Black, or gay, or Muslim, or differently abled, suddenly those divisive wires become deeply complex, highly contextual, and nearly impossible to pull apart. All this to say, the oppressions faced by humans would not exist were it not for the oppression of other animals. If we think we've got it bad, well, they've got it worse.
Arguably, throughout history, there have always been people and communities that have challenged animal consumption and oppression. But the rise of the modern industrial animal agricultural complex, which takes into account the aggressive collection of natural resources, the abuse of human labor, privatization of indigenous land, wastefulness, and implications on public health on a global scale, raises questions about speciesism to new heights, and introduces not only concerns about race, class, and gender, but also about ecosystems and planetary sustainability. This summons the need for deep interrogation into the way that we as humans expect to coexist with other animals, the planet, and other humans too. The mess at this stage is a mess of our own design, and it's one we need to design our way through, and more importantly, to understand better. All this to say, at the heart of our relationship with the modern Western food system and industrial animal agriculture is our relationship with design. And that's where my work comes in. As one part researcher and one part creator, my work is as much about theory and abstraction as it is about making, doing, feeling, and practice.
I look at the ways design tangles with meat eating by asking questions about design's role in the making of today's industrial animal agricultural complex, from stem to stern. In a world where we produce roughly 400 million tons of meat per year, I ask questions such as, how do we contain 50,000 plus chickens in a single area? Which leads me to ask questions about the design of the architecture. I ask questions about how do we organize the distribution of 20,000 plus cattle, transport trucks, and employees in one area, which leads me to ask more design questions about the landscape. I ask about how we feed animals to achieve the yield and growth rate we desire, which leads me to ask questions about the feed, which leads me to ask questions about the plants in the feed, and the plants we use to make the plants. I ask myself, how do we efficiently move thousands of animals at a time from living thing to a supermarket commodity, which leads me to ask questions about the designs of confinement. I ask questions about how animal bodies are moved and who moves them. I ask questions about who kills them and how they're transported, where they're stored, how they're cut, how they're advertised, where they're sold, what they're packaged in, what they're cooked with, how they're cooked, and what we eat them with. Then, after stepping back in horror, I ask how design can be used to challenge unsustainable, oppressive, and mindless patterns embedded in the continuum of modern meat production and consumption. And while there are many countless ways this could be achieved, my work focuses on the interstitial spaces that exist between us and the stuff of meat, the discomforts, the uncertainties, and those hovering questions, by asking how design can be used to investigate such spaces, ultimately as a means to help us gain purchase in our complicated relationships with meat. I do this through writing, of course, but also through practices of making, such as drawing, cooking, cleaning bones, making quirky films, and weird recipes. Making Meat Matter is all about the stuff that leaves us uncomfortable with meat, those queasy feelings we can't quite name but know all too well. Beef in a Blender was a performance based on an eclectic collection of recipes from a former project. Chances are, there are a number of things that leave you feeling uncomfortable about the way the narrator pluckily goes about making a beef puree from field to, well, blender in just over 3 minutes. When I made this project, I was particularly invested in the level of discomfort that comes out of suggesting chunks of meat be put in a blender. Indeed, it sounds humorous because of just how unusual such a suggestion would be. Contrary-wise, it is quite acceptable and commonplace to suggest the butchery of animals with knives, cooking their meat over high temperatures, or even organizing a hunt to go kill them. It is not quite disgust that surfaces when putting beef in a blender, although the thought of drinking the final product might, but rather a resonance with the ragged pulsing of the blades and the loud whir of the machine that has us imagining our own hand caught in the grime. We come strangely parallel to feeling like beef, and it doesn't feel too good. I also wanted to probe at the gender biases associated with meat and meat handlers. The narrator is obviously a very feminine character who stereotypically would not be associated with the type to bust out her Winchester and take to the field. And while it's comical to go about hunting beef, as she calls it, she manages to do so capably, providing a calm and confident instruction along the way. The domestic-professional, indoor-outdoor, male-female dichotomies are further blurred when she continues the recipe in her home kitchen, using tools and appliances heavily advertised for women in the home as modern conveniences made to make cooking easier. Historically, meat is associated with men and maleness. Thus, putting it in the hands of a housewife gone hunting is intended to poke at underlying expectations of who can cook, hunt, or eat meat, and why.
Design's figurative and literal tools and languages have been key to the success of the industrialized food system, normalizing oppressive behaviors and procedures in the raising, killing, and eating of other animals, and inspiring competition and dominance in the commoditization of meat. Should we aspire to a more just multi-species coexistence, where other animals, humans, and environments are not pawnable products or absent reference, it's safe to say the designs of such devices requires serious interrogation.
Unfortunately, industrialized meat and the mechanisms of modernism have become so deeply embedded into our collective contemporary way of life, and these destructive devices have long gone hidden and unattended. However, modern meat's devastating effects are becoming increasingly palpable, and greater attention has been brought to meat's attachments to global food insecurity, climate change, public health, classism, racism, and sexism. But this means it has also become an overwhelmingly complex and wicked problem for everyday consumers. That means you, me, and everyone we know, leaving most of us paralyzed and/or ambivalent in the face of it all. The scale and scope of the industrial animal agricultural complex and its devastating effects far exceeds the realities of our daily lives. There's a lot of doom and gloom in our world, and to be fair, my subject matter isn't exactly set against a backdrop of sunshine and rainbows. But in such conversations is often overwritten the significance of consumer agency, the power of subtle transitions, mindfulness, and that everyday people are the authors, nay, the designers, of their everyday lives. In the shadow of overwhelm and the influence of major players like government, media, and big business, we often fail to see possibility in ourselves to make positive change. Now, industrialization has worked hard to homogenize consumers into categories and typologies, just as it has done to animals destined as food. I'm arguing that this agenda is not only oppressive, destructive, and reductive, but unsustainable in a planetary sense. The entire methodology of industrialized meat is not only problematic for consumers, livestock, and ecosystems, but as it eats up all of our valuable water, soil, and minerals, it pushes us increasingly faster towards global food insecurity. Therefore, I argue, the opportunity for sustainable living lies in the differences between us. It means pushing back against homogenization and asking what makes meat matter. Not only as a global community of humans, but to you as an individual. It means finding a way of making something you may have never once thought about personal, because once it becomes personal, it becomes political. So where does design fit into this as part of the solution? Simply put, design's modernist, patriarchal agenda has been influential in the creation of such destructive food provisioning. So it stands to reason that by rewiring its objectives and methodologies through a feminist corrective,
We can explore it as a field intent on de-hierarchalizing not only itself, but the industrial animal agricultural complex, and beyond. But that means evaluating design as something quite unlike what it is. It means scaling down, focusing on process rather than products, and experience rather than output. It means relearning what making is, such as who is a maker, how we make, and why we make what we make. In the perspective of my project, we are all makers, and if we all maintain a relationship with meat or animals, we are capable of making it matter. My doctoral thesis project, Making Meat Matter, facilitates space for consumers to become physically closer and better acquainted with the subject of meat in order to establish their unexplored relationships with it, and to uncover new forms of agency, feelings, and ideas towards it. The project does this by inviting groups of diverse participants to multisensory makerspaces as a means to activate thinking on the subject of meat through simple creative activities that allow these participants to experience meat in material, emotional, embodied, and artistic ways focused on freedom of expression and collaboration. Each makerspace features no or low-tech art making, crafting, and cooking activities featuring meat for members of my local community, including non-human animals. Placing participants with meat out of the context of daily buying and eating is intended to be jarring so as to activate new modes of thinking through making and materiality.
Right now, I'm working on designing a tabletop role-playing game. You might know this type of game best through the classic Dungeons & Dragons, where players are invited to invent unique avatars, work together to create an exciting story, and travel through a medieval world of, well, Dungeons & Dragons. This board game that I'm designing is similar in that it invites players to develop interesting characters, but it's different in that it takes place in the supermarket. Indeed, it's about transforming the mundane experience of buying meat into a space to make wild and imaginative escapades where players are meant to work together to create a banquet for friends and family. What will happen next for my work? I guess we'll just have to roll the dice and see. I don't have any food. It's not eatable. You can't. Oh, thanks. That's gross. Okay, let's try this again.